I knew that I had to get out of there. And so I just kept breaking rules until finally I broke the big rule, which was like literally climbing over the commune wall to go see a boy.
The Culting of America, a survivor's perspective. Today on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson. Daniella Mestyanek Young did not join a cult. She was born into one. Members of her family were co-founders and leaders of the cult known simply as the Children of God, or as they called themselves, the Family. She was born in Brazil, where the family had a secure compound, and from the earliest age, Daniella was subjected to the very strict rules of the family. She was subjected to punishment for the smallest infraction, and she was subject to all kinds of abuse. We'll let you use your imagination as to what kind that entailed. Until finally, at age 15, Daniella managed to escape from the family. And she made her way to Texas, where amazingly enough, she put herself through high school and then attended college, where she graduated as the valedictorian of her class. And then Daniella joined the U.S. Army, where she became an intelligence officer. And it was in the Army that she realized, as she explains in her memoir called Uncultured, that the Army was not that different from the cult she had escaped. Now, in her new book called The Culting of America, Daniella explains what a cult is, how to recognize one, the tactics they use, and how you can protect yourself. So, now let's meet Daniella Mestyanek Young. I see people online still, more than 3 years later, talking about, reviewing, discussing, and analyzing Uncultured. Does that surprise you in any way that it has such legs?
No, no, not really. I think that I spent 20 years in the US trying to tell people where I came from, and they would think that was very far-fetched and far away. But then they would tell me their own sort of cult story or story of living under authoritarian control. And so one of the reasons I wrote Uncultured was to help people, other people who have been through authoritarian control, but maybe don't realize it because it wasn't a famous cult, and help them understand. And I also just think everyone's trying to understand what's going on in the United States right now. And so my story is pretty relevant.
Well, it strikes me that most small children grow up thinking, or at least when they're young, their life, they assume, is what everybody's life is like. And, if this is the way my day begins and ends, that's the way everybody's the day begins and ends. At what point did you realize this is different, and not every kid lives like this?
Yeah, I was very, very young. I was about 6 years old. I remember realizing, out there, people live a different way. But I would say that maybe in cults, we always know that, because the "we are the best, outsiders are wrong" is just a part of our everyday life. So for me, it was more at 6 years old being like, I don't want this to be my life. And it was that understanding of I'd rather be out there with them than in here with my people.
Is that the hallmark of a cult, is that we're the best and everybody else is trash?
That is definitely, yes. This is what I call the sacred assumption, the thing you have to believe in a cult. And it is almost always some version of we are the best, we are right. Cults even love to name themselves starting with and the Children of God. Even when they rebranded, it was the Family, because it's this subconscious way of telling yourself that we are the right one.
Wow. And they plant that seed very early in your mind, don't they?
Yes. Right, pretty much right from the beginning.
In your case, from birth, really.
Yeah. And it's when you are growing up isolated, held back from the world, it's not like you even have other examples of other things to compare yourself against. We grew up in a commune with 100 people, and like everyone's parents did the same things. All the kids were, essentially interchangeable, kind of. Because that's the other thing about a cult is you're not supposed to stand out, so isolated from the world, but then fitting in perfectly as a little cog in the machine. And I was bad at that. I was bad at that in the Army too.
Well, yeah, I want to fast forward here a little bit. How did you get out of the cult?
So when I was 15, so first of all, it's important to know that my mom was born in the cult as well. So I was born 3 generations in, and I didn't really have an escape route because many of my colleagues had grandparents they could go back to. Meanwhile, my grandfather actually ran the money for the whole organization. So I sort of started a rebellious campaign when I was 14 and 15, and I was being trafficked through Mexico and Lower Texas as a carnival clown and performer, and I just wanted no part of it. But also the year that we were 15 was a year of additional indoctrination because 16, you were an adult. And we were a cult that engaged in what I call forced polyamory. They call it free love, but it was pretty forced. And of course, didn't believe in birth control. So for me, this was very, very real because my mom got pregnant at 14 by a 40-something-year-old adult man. And so I knew that I had to get out of there. And so I just kept breaking rules until finally I broke the big rule, which was like literally climbing over the commune wall to go see a boy out in the world. And you're not supposed to have fellowship with unbelievers. But it's interesting because like when a cult figures out you want to leave, they want you to get out of there as fast as possible, usually. And because they don't want you infecting other people. However, if they think they can kind of like break you and get you to recommit, they will usually try that. And they tried it with me. And of course it was scary because my other option was just go out into the world where I don't know anybody. And here I give my mom a lot of credit, who like took me on a walk outside the commune and was like, hey, just go. They found a place for me with one of my older stepsisters who I didn't know, but who was living in Texas and willing to take me in. And so I ended up, my parents took me on a bus from Guadalajara, Mexico to Houston and dropped into a 4,000 kid high school out of, growing up on communes my whole life.
Wow. And I'm sure given today's high schools, you fit right in and were perfectly normal and everybody had a great time.
No, it was hard. I call that chapter Dazed and Confused. And I literally think to myself, like, oh, I'm from another planet. Like, I don't know how to think like these kids or anything. I think college was a little easier for me because I was a just very obsessed student, just very excited to learn. But I think the peer relationships are really hard for all of us when we leave cults.
Teenage years are hard enough as it is.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, unfortunately, I get into what I later find out is a pretty toxic relationship. I end up marrying this guy, and I realize I'm either going to be stuck being an army wife because he's joined the army, or I could do it too. So I decide to go into the army and go be an intelligence officer, which was very similar in a lot of ways to the cult, as I would find out.
Yeah, I was going to say, did you basically left one cult to join another as you saw it?
Yes. And that was, on my first day of basic training, it's this exercise where they have you pack all of your equipment, new equipment, into a duffel bag. This duffel bag weighs about 50 pounds. And you pull up to basic training. They're screaming. You have to hold this bag above your head. And it's like a 2 to 3 hour event. And I just recognized it. I recognized they're playing a game. We're doing this. And at the time I was like, oh, I just joined another cult, okay, I know what we're doing. And it's really interesting, this exercise, because it is two super important things. It's irrational, right? Nobody's going to go do that. And it's impossible, right? So no one can just kind of hold the bag up for 2 or 3 hours. Like you're going to drop it. So they got you in a mode of desperation. And this is the moment where people either kind of give up and go home or push through it. And there's research that shows that once you push through the first kind of wacky or irrational thing that a group asks you to do, you're pretty unlikely to push back in the future against other irrational things. So cults will almost always introduce these kind of wacky things into your initial training, breaking.
Now, the Army doesn't have a physical paddle per se, but they have other means of keeping you in line, don't they?
Yeah, and that's what's interesting. The ways that you break somebody is isolation, pain, fear, and small acts of kindness. And we hear all this talk about the military has changed. They don't, drill sergeants don't punch you in the face anymore, but they basically make you do it to yourself. Drop and give me 100 push-ups. Like they are making you commit the violence and the pain to yourself. And that's part of how they break you down. And it works very, very effectively.
Did your experience in a cult make you a better intelligence officer?
I think so. First of all, when I had that thought, oh, we're in another cult, my second thought was, oh, I'm going to be better at this than the rest of them. Because I already know how to do this. I already know how to kind of tamp down my individuality and just do for the cause. And I also think I started seeing sort of the similarities between the group behavior really quickly. But I was like, being an intelligence officer is what I'm good at. I still kind of think I'm the expert on the bad guy here in the outside world.
Well, yeah, you become very good at reading people, don't you?
Yeah, and it is also essentially, it is just professionalized us versus them, right? Like you're the enemy, you're the outsider. I'm the outsider. We are the red team, the intelligence. We are the experts on the bad guy. And we are just there to tell you everything about the outside world and how it could go wrong and how, these things could hurt you. So in many different ways, I think it was easy for me. What was not easy for me in both the cult or the Army was the culture of put your head down, don't ask questions, and go along.
When our conversation continues, are you a member of a cult right now?
There are tens of thousands of podcasts out there, and we know you have endless choices.
That's why it means so much that you've chosen to spend a little of your time with us. Time is the most precious thing any of us has.
If this episode has been worth your while, would you do us a small favor and tell a friend? Let them know about this podcast you discovered. Now I've heard everything.
And don't forget to join us every Friday for a brand new episode. We love having you here.
Now back to my conversation with cult survivor Daniella Mestyanek Young. Now, your new book, The Culting of America, draws upon your own experience in both fields, both in Children of God and in the U.S. Army. Is a cult, by definition, necessarily a bad thing?
So I think so. Although it did take me 20 years to figure out how to explain this. So in my definition of cult, and in most people's definition of cult, there is an exploitation dynamic. I call it exploitation of labor. Cults are generally organized crime. They're almost always about labor. And it is using manipulative and coercive tactics in order to get more from you than they would otherwise. So, this is why I say that you don't have good cults, or at the very least, you don't have cults that don't ultimately hurt the individual, this is where I kind of place the military. It's a cult. I think I saw plenty of officers trying to keep it a good, positive organization. But at the end of the day, it's a cult that we ask 1% of our population to be in, and it harms them and it harms their families. And we're asking them to do that for the good of the country.
But now, how wide a net do you cast? For example, if I'm, say, a nearly 70-year-old man from the Midwest, I'm a lifelong Lutheran, a lifelong Chicago Cubs fan, diehard Cubs, and maybe I vote Democratic, am I in a cult in any of those ways?
So I don't think fan groups are cults. I think fan groups is still individual behavior, and being a Cubs fan is an identity, right? Like, I was a Swiftie, Taylor Swift fan for 20 years. I'm deconstructing it now, but I don't think that is a cult. I don't think you mentioned anything that would necessarily be a cult, but this is what I have kind of focused on in this book. This is my cult tactics book, The Culting of America, where it's not as much of a call out book, although I do call out some organizations that I think are cults and are dangerous, but it's more of a book where I break down my 10-part definition of cult and I show you the tactics in real cults, in the army, and then in regular American organizations. And it's because I really want people to be able to defend themselves and protect themselves against any of this kind of toxic behavior. It doesn't, really matter what name we put on it, in my opinion.
Well, in today's political climate, as I'm sure you know, the word cult is tossed around very freely. People are accused of being in one kind of cult or another. Is any of that accurate? Do you see any cult-ish behavior in American politics today?
So I'll start by saying that any binary process is going to be cultier, and the fact that we only have two kind of not reasonable, but, two parties that are set against each other, like, that is going to be culty. And every election, the cult dynamics really skyrocket. We're given this message that this one person is going to save America, and this other person is going to be the end. That being said, I do look at MAGA as a cult.
That extends to a lot of human endeavors, though.
It does. And I think that is part of the problem. Part of what I look at in the book under the us versus them mentality chapter is America and our history of kind of being very binary and black and white and isolationist. Not to mention being founded by the Puritans, who really were a lot more of an extreme cult than I think we really talk about, and the way that has filtered down. And to go back to politics, I do in this book look at the cult of MAGA and kind of how that has risen up and is having a effect in politics right now. Toward the end of the book, in the ends justifies the means portion, I do think that we are seeing this at kind of a large scale in our country right now.
It almost reaches the level of the Bloods and the Crips, where you've got the colors and the gang signs and things like that. I'm guessing those are pretty extreme examples of cults, but they are cults, are they not?
Well, yes. And this is kind of what I'm trying to get people to realize, is that groups are all on a spectrum, and cults, gangs, terrorist groups, these are just kind of the most extreme groups on the spectrum. But there's no really magic threshold at which, you cross into being a cult. It is kind of this just coercive environment growing. And also, right now, the polarization and the isolation because of technology, right, is something that we're dealing with that we hadn't seen before. So in the 70s, when my grandfather joined a cult, if you wanted to isolate an American, you kind of had to take them off to your commune in Texas or Brazil, because everyone was watching the same channels, right? We had media and news reporting that was at least supposedly trying to be unbiased, but the real important thing is that everyone was watching the same stuff. So even if you were on opposite ends of an issue, and yes, we've always been binary like that, you were still sharing the same reality. Now we have what's called algorithmic radicalization. When our tech overlords realized that if they feed us more extreme content, we will stay glued to our screens longer. And so what we have right now, and this is something President Obama warned about in his last speech in office, was these silos that we have built ourselves into in America, where the two sides aren't really talking to each other at all.
I wanted to get your take on something that several years ago I spoke with a Jonestown survivor, and she made the point that no one wakes up in the morning and says, I think I'll join a cult today. How do cults get new people in?
Well, that's where the mission comes into play. And this is my third part of the 10-part definition, is the transcendent mission. Most cult leaders at some point when they're building their thing, they either get involved in philanthropy or politics generally. And, religion can be right in there. But there's some sort of public facing thing that allows them to interface with the public and recruit people. Lots of cults even have fronts, like Shen Yun, the Chinese dance show, is the financial front of a cult called Falun Gong. And people don't know that when they go to the show. And, it's the beginning of this pipeline of getting you in. But there's always a deceptive recruiting component of pulling people into cults. But this mission is the important thing. People don't join cults to follow a person. They join it because they're given a mission that they think is really important.
Now, Jonestown happened, of course, almost 10 years before you were born. During your experience with the Children of God, did you ever fear, or first of all, did you ever even hear about Jonestown?
I'm sure we heard about Jonestown, and also, but in a good way. Our cult leaders studied that. He took things like death as the ultimate orgasm straight from Jim Jones. But the one that really impacted my life was Waco. That happened when I was 10 years old, and 1993. So I was 7. And that was the way we heard every detail of what was happening to them, but also at the same time reassuring us that we're not a cult. So it was this weird, I write about in Uncultured, where it was they're a cult because he believes he's Jesus, and that's not right. And we're not a cult. We are the right ones. However, look what America does to cults, right? And so they used it as a way to reinforce the persecution complex and the idea that the outside world hates you. And at the same time, in the 90s, the Children of God was also being, quote unquote, persecuted around the world. There were court cases in London, there was raids in Argentina. And so this was all kind of used to just inculcate more fear, but also to program us how we need to deal with the outside world. And doing battle drills for what would happen if the raids came, that was not new in the military to me when I joined, because we would do midnight drills as children.
It seems so odd how one life prepared you for your next.
Especially now. I do feel strangely placed right now to help people really understand, kind of what we are going through in our country right now, just because I've seen it so much. And I think that anyone who's lived under authoritarian control has been kind of triggered by watching what we're going through as a country or experiencing it. A lot of survivors said they stopped watching television the first time he was president because we all just felt like our particular cult leader had won. And that was what really, honestly, the first Trump election was what really motivated me to start writing and talking about cults, because I just felt like I could see it. I could see it happening and how it was going to go. And the way he, I kept saying he's going to win because of his extremism, not in spite of it. And we did even see on the left a lot of using grievance politics. I can specifically think about Bernie Bros, these kinds of similar tactics. And one of the unfortunate things is that it's easier to use hate and fear to motivate people versus kind of love and understanding and appreciating everyone's differences. And so that message that he was able to give to, white male conservative America, that this country has wronged you, these others are the reason for it, and I'm going to give it back to you. Like, that is very effective.
And if there are no apparent others, we'll just make some.
We will make them, exactly. And even with the shooting of Renee Good that we just saw last week, the need to other her so quickly as a queer woman, because otherwise she looks like his base, and they don't want them to relate to that. I do wonder that this won't be a big crack in the brainwashing, though, because this is, subconsciously, cracks work. Cracks are great at letting light in, so for these MAGA women who just saw, right, law officers turn on a woman who looks just like them, I think that is something that's going to be waking more people up, no matter if they try to explain it, right? Like, we're seeing MAGA say awful things and like trying to justify it. But I think that one's gonna stick with people.
Wow. And so your new book is The Culting of America. Your previous book, your memoir, is Uncultured. Daniella, thank you so much for joining us today on Now I've Heard Everything.
Thanks so much for having me.
Now you can find out more about Daniella Mestyanek Young and where to find her on the web and how to buy her books, Uncultured and The Culting of America, by simply tapping the links in our show notes. Now, we may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. And of course, you can also find links to Daniella's website, as well as her presence on social media, on TikTok, YouTube, Instagram, etc. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to Now I've Heard Everything so that you don't miss anything in coming weeks and months. And now, it's time for Now I've Heard That Again. Now, during my conversation with Daniella, I mentioned that I'd once interviewed a member of the Jonestown cult. So now let's listen to just a short excerpt from that, my 1998 conversation with Jonestown survivor Deborah Layton.
Everybody that joined, they were looking for meaning in their lives. Whether they were 80-year-olds and uneducated, they were still bright. Whether they were college kids and it was the end of the war in Vietnam, it was the 60s and 70s, we were all looking to delve into something bigger than ourselves, that we wanted meaning in our life. It isn't unusual. I mean, Aristotle was looking for meaning in his life 2,500 years ago. And it's over time that these organizations can change. And there are a lot of groups out there that front as self-help organizations. Nobody joins a cult. You don't go into something thinking it's going to kill you. You join something, you go into a relationship even. It can happen when you really enjoy the person. They're wonderful. There's a couple of things that are kind of iffy, but they're so kind.
And you tell yourself no relationship is perfect.
Exactly. And you can find yourself entrapped, imprisoned, even in a relationship, and it becomes abusive. It happens in families that you don't know how to extricate yourself safely, those of your loved ones and yourself. And it can happen in a job. And over time, it was that little inner voice of ours. When I join People's Temple and other organizations do this, they tell you to turn down that little inner voice of yours, that it's selfishness, that yes, things are hard, and for the greater good of mankind, we need to do this, that, or the other thing. And it is hard, so turn that little selfishness down, because it's egocentric. And that's your reasoning ability. And over time, it's muted and you can't think clearly any longer.
And you can hear the full interview with Deborah Layton on our website, heardeverything.com. Sidebar. Well, this is season 8 of Now I've Heard Everything, and we've gotten a lot of new subscribers, new followers, and for that, I really appreciate you. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us. But I also wanted to take this opportunity to reintroduce myself and the podcast and what we're trying to do here. I had a long radio career that started in the early 1970s. Over a 30-year period within that career, I interviewed authors of books who were on tour. And as I used to say, everybody writes a book sooner or later, and it's kind of true. So I met not just best-selling authors. Back in the day, it was Tom Clancy, Jackie Collins, and John Updike. In later years, it was Vince Flynn and Brad Meltzer and Stephanie Meyer. But along the way, I met hundreds and hundreds of authors, but also many, many other people who'd written books. They weren't authors per se, but they were leaders in politics, sports, the arts, religion, science, and I got to meet them all. So over the years, I amassed a collection of over 10,000 interviews. Now, when I retired from radio in 2018, I started this podcast because I wanted to take those interviews from my archive, which is actually sitting right here next to me. It's a rack full of cassettes and CDs. And I wanted to represent those interviews again to audiences who may not have heard them the first time. So I would go back each week and find 3 interviews that I would put on this podcast. Figured it might be interesting to hear an interview from 30 years ago with Dolly Parton, or William Shatner, or Marvin Hamlish, or Jimmy Carter, or Barack Obama, or any of a dozen, Nobel Prize winners, Hall of Famers, people who were famous or infamous, as the case may be. But in the middle of season 6, a couple of years ago, I realized that I kind of missed interviewing, that I wanted to get back into it somehow. I wasn't content just to do archive anymore. And along the way, during the span of the first six seasons of Now I've Heard Everything, podcasting itself evolved from an audio-only medium to video. A lot of people were doing video podcasts, and I thought that would be very interesting to get into. So last year, about halfway through season 7, I made the decision that starting with season 8, which is what we're into right now, that I would start doing fresh interviews again. And they would be video interviews. For the first time in my career, I'd always been in radio. I'd never done video before. But here we are. Now, back in the day, I would interview anybody on any topic. I have, again, leaders in politics and science and religion and the arts and sports and everything. And it was fantastic. But I wanted a little bit narrower focus, quite a bit narrower focus for this season of Now I've Heard Everything. And so we're concentrating on biography, autobiography, and memoir. And not just authors of books, autobiography, biography, and memoir, but I wanted to do the stories of people's lives, and specifically the how and the why of people's lives. The what and the where and the when, those are good. Those are very valuable, but I really wanted to get into people's heads and find out, why did you do that? How did you do that? So that's what my focus is with this season of Now I've Heard Everything. And I really appreciate you joining me each week for just a few minutes. And I hope you find the series interesting enough to tell a friend about it. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, a remarkable family story that could perhaps only have happened in America. My conversation with former White House Special Assistant to the President, John Ficklin.
My grandfather being born about 1855, born enslaved, and 2 of his sons became maitre d's in the White House, and his grandson became a special assistant to the president.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. Don't forget, we post new episodes every Friday. And we hope you'll hit that subscribe button and start following us now. We really appreciate your time. Thank you so much for listening. I'm Bill Thompson.